Be it the Christian Bible, the Tanakh of the Jews, or the Holy Quran of the Muslims, within the pages of these sacred books, it is believed one can find the path to reunite, once in heaven, into the loving arms of his Creator, the God of Abraham, also known as God in Christianity, Yahweh in Judaism, and Allah in Islam. Billions worldwide pose their faith in the one and only God, and in the scripture contained in these holy texts. Yet, how many of us truly understand where the stories written in these holy books and the concept of God itself really originate? Have you ever wondered, why do the stories in the Tanakh, Bible, and Quran share so many similarities, not just among themselves, but also often bear striking resemblances to the mythologies of other ancient civilizations which existed thousands of years prior to these religions being established? What if I were to tell you that the stories within these books originated thousands of years prior to these books being written? That before Jesus resurrected, many others before him had resurrected. That before Noah saved humanity from the great flood, many others before him had done the same. That before Eve committed the original sin, many others before her had similarly transgressed. And even before God created the heavens and the earth, there were other gods who similarly performed these very acts. In today's video, we will delve into the origins of gods and religion. We will explore answers to questions like why primary gods are often associated with thunderstorms and lightning, why they are typically imagined as males and not females, and why they are considered benevolent but are also known to punish humanity with great floods. We will look into why mountains are deemed the most sacred places in various religions, why bulls are venerated as the most sacred animals, while snakes are often the unholiest. We will also uncover the roots of spirits, ghosts, and demons, and explore the origins of the concept of sins. And step by step, we will understand how, from a very polytheistic core, monotheism and the God of Abraham emerged as the dominant world religion, eclipsing polytheism. I sincerely thank you for being here. Now, for the sake of knowledge, we're going to travel 5,000 years back in time to when our ancestors lived in the most humble conditions. The beginning I will present to you will feel a bit strange, but don't worry, everything will make sense as the story progresses. Our story begins here in the land of Sumer, our first civilization, a time when humans did not believe in just one god, but many deities, a time when polytheism was the norm. The year is 2900 BCE, quite a while since the Sumerian god Enlil created our world by separating heaven from earth. Enlil is the most revered god of the Sumerian pantheon, so glorious that not even the other gods can look upon him and live. Enlil is also known as Great Mountain, for he lives in the mountains, closest to the sky, in temples humans erected for him, and from these mountains he observes, from above, his creation. The people of Sumer know they are being observed from the mountains and hills, and they know when Enlil decides to leave the mountains and comes to visit them. When Enlil decides to visit mankind, enormous black clouds come from these mountains, covering the sun, and thus bringing darkness over the land. And as the clouds draw nearer and nearer, the people feel increasingly more anxious and scared, and this makes them wonder, what could possibly be the reason why Enlil decided to visit us today? Enlil, god of the wind and thunderstorm, has just arrived, claiming the sky for himself, and he now looms powerfully over the land of Sumer. The winds are so strong that trees are being uprooted, and people can barely stay on their feet. Everyone who can is now desperately running to their homes. His deafening thunder fills the people with fear and makes the land tremble. His arrival brings judgment upon those who have sinned the most, striking them with lightning. But then, rain comes, a lot of it, for many hours, before Enlil decides it is enough, and thus retreats back to the mountains. The farmers come outside of their homes. They look around, and now they feel thankful and rejoice for the gift of water they have just received. Rain is very scarce in the land of Sumer. This will bring new life to the seeds farmers planted, with so much love and dedication. Enlil is a benevolent god who loves his creation, and does so not just by pouring water onto the crops of farmers, but also by actively driving every bull which pulls the plows. Cattle are such important animals for farming. The people of Sumer dedicate a full constellation in the night sky to Enlil, the constellation of Bootes, also known as the ox driver, and the constellation of Taurus. Bull is considered to be the first constellation ever drawn in mankind, probably what the Sumerians referred to as Gugalana, the bull of heavens. However, Enlil is not always as benevolent as you saw him today, and the people of Sumer were rightly afraid for a good reason for his arrival. Enlil is a very moody god, and when his anger is larger than his compassion, he descends from the mountains on board of his clouds, and he covers the land of Sumer. Then, he starts pouring water into the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, until their shores can hold no more, declaring, "Humans are too noisy. Humans are too many. They do not let me sleep. These sinners must be washed away from existence, so that new humans may replace them." And so, the water from the Tigris and Euphrates overflows. The floods crush the villages, demolishing all buildings, annihilating all which lives within their walls. Men, women, kids, oldies. Nobody is left alive. Nobody except one. The god Enki, who created humans by mixing clay, the earthly piece of our mortality, and blood from a dead god, our divine image, knows the intentions of Enlil, and afraid to lose his dearest creation, 1 week prior to the great flood that will wash humanity out of its existence, Enki comes into the dreams of the wisest man, Ziusudra, and tasks him with building a giant 7-floor ship with 9 sections on each floor, big enough to fit a couple of each species of animals and seeds of plants, his family, and the craftsmen of the village. The great floods come, as foretold by Enki, and annihilate all which lives. Ziusudra and his ship are now the only hope which separates life's continuation from extinction. But after 6 days and nights of relentless rainfall, on the 7th day, the waters start receding, and Ziusudra opens the hatch and notices the tip of the Mount Nishir at 12 leagues of distance. Ziusudra's ship lodges on Mount Nishir, and as the waters continue to decrease, after 7 days of waiting, Ziusudra releases a dove to search for land, but the dove returns, having found no place to land. Then he releases a swallow, but it too returns. Finally, he releases a raven, which never returns, signaling that the waters have receded, and that life is now possible again. Ziusudra immediately jumps off the ship and sacrifices a sheep to revere the gods, thus saying, "I offer incense in front of the mountain Ziggurat," describing the mountain as a giant temple. 7 and 7 cult vessels I put in place, and into the fire, underneath, or into their bowls, I poured reeds, cedar, and myrtle. The gods smelled the savor. The gods smelled the sweet savor. The gods crowded like flies around the sacrificer. Enlil descends from the sky and stares at Ziusudra. Enlil is not happy to see humans alive, but the aroma of the sacrifice makes him happy, and the courage of Ziusudra and his wife is rewarded with immortality. The world rejoices, animals and plants repopulate the world, and the story of humanity sees, therefore, a new beginning. Sumer was our first known civilization, a civilization of farmers, which thrived in the Middle East by building the earliest cities along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This civilization laid the foundation of human knowledge, with many life-changing discoveries and inventions, such as mathematics for calculating the number of items in inventories, transaction volumes, and the size of fields. Sumerians also created the first writing system, cuneiform, to record the names of buyers and sellers, and the debts incurred within such transactions. Literature and the stories of gods, previously passed orally from person to person, were now written down for history to remember them. In these stories, although Enlil was the main deity of the Sumerian pantheon, he was not the only god to be worshipped. Each city-state had its own favorite deity, and over the centuries, due to conflicts and famines, many people from many different cities who worshipped many different gods moved or were displaced, carrying their culture and gods with them across the Middle East. As the centuries passed, Sumer gradually faded and its territory got slowly absorbed by the Akkadians, a Semitic-speaking group that settled in the same area, and the culture of Sumer, discoveries and inventions were assimilated and carried forward by this new civilization. The Akkadian Empire, the inheritor and preserver of the Sumerian culture, greatly expanded under the brilliant king Sargon the Great, and through his numerous military expeditions, the Sumerian-Akkadian discoveries and culture spread over a vast area of influence around the Persian Gulf, Anatolia, and the Levant. The Akkadian Empire was successful for a while, but eventually, after an invasion from Iran, over the centuries, it split into two regions, a northern region known as Assyria, and a southern region known as Babylonia. And despite this political division, both regions kept writing in cuneiform and speaking Akkadian, sharing, nonetheless, similar cultural traits. In the meantime, other civilizations, such as the Hittites, Hurrians, and Elamites were emerging, but due to political, military dominance, and cultural influence of the Assyria-Babylonia bloc, cuneiform spread as the primary writing system, and Akkadian became the lingua franca of trade and diplomacy in the region. This influence made the tales of the Sumerian gods readable and well known to even more civilizations, which read them, adopted them, and built upon these stories, creating their own unique narratives. Famous tales, such as the Great Flooding, featuring the Ark of Ziusudra, from the Sumerian creation myth of Eridu Genesis, later evolved into the Akkadian equivalent of the Ark of Atrahasis in the Epic of Atrahasis, and into the Ark of Utnapishtim in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh. Many Sumerian gods were also adopted and adapted into the Akkadian culture and language. The Sumerian god Enlil, for instance, was renamed Elyon, and interestingly, Enlil, once the most important god in the Sumerian pantheon, was now overtaken by the new Babylonian thunderstorm god, Marduk, whose name means calf of the sun. The origins of the god Marduk are not very clear though. When Babylonia got overwhelmed by the Amorite Semitic-speaking group from the Levant, these people may have added their main god, Amaru, to the Akkadian pantheon, translating it as Marduki in Akkadian, and therefore uniting their culture to that of the Akkadians. According to the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, Marduk created the universe by separating waters from waters and creating the heavens and the earth by killing and dividing the body of the serpent dragon goddess Tiamat into two halves, one above and one below, gaining his seat on the throne as the chief of the gods, bringing order over chaos. Centuries later, Enlil and Marduk were considered such sacred names that the Amorite rulers began to use the title Bel Belu, meaning Lord when referring to them, and as a result, the identities of these two gods often merged together. The word Belu, furthermore, was also directly related to the Akkadian word Bil, which in turn refers to the planet Jupiter, the planet often linked to thunderstorm gods in most mythologies. Now, let's move our focus to the west of Mesopotamia, to what was once called the Levant or Canaan, an area of Semitic-speaking civilizations, which goes from modern-day Syria to Sinai, covering the modern-day countries of Lebanon, Israel, the state of Palestine, and Jordan. Similarly to the Amorites, who were now ruling Babylonia, the Levantine people avoided pronouncing the name of their deities and used a title like Bel instead. In the Levant, for instance, the primary deity of the Arameans in the city of Palmyra, Syria, was Baal, and Baal was the lord of Ugarit. Meanwhile, El Elyon, thought to live on a mountain called Lel, was regarded as the highest god of these pantheons. El had 70 kids from his wife Atharat, and he was a very passive god, whose sons and daughters took the active role on his behalf. But for the sake of brevity, we will cover only 2 of his sons. The first is Baal, and the other one is the god of the Old Testament you will discover in the next chapter. The title Baal was mostly used to refer to the god Hadad, a native Levantine god said to live on Mount Shapanu, equivalent to the Sumerian rain god Ishkur, later known as Adad in Akkadian. The main Levantine gods were slightly different compared to the Mesopotamian gods, because the farmers in Mesopotamia rely primarily on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers for crop irrigation. Meanwhile, the farmers in the Levant relied on the rainfall brought by the regular storms in the winter season. and for this reason, Baal was also known by the epithets Thunderer, Rider of the Clouds, Great Radiant Bull, and depicted with a hat made of bull horns. In the Ugaritic collection of stories, known as the Baal cycle, the themes of life, death, and resurrection are prominent. Within these texts, it's narrated that each year, Baal fights the god of death, Mot. In this battle, Mot kills Baal and imprisons him in the underworld, thus bringing drought and death to the fields. However, Baal's sister, Inanna, retaliates by killing Mot and scattering his ashes, which releases Baal from the underworld. Upon his resurrection, Baal brings his thunderstorms to the fields, renewing the land's fertility. Resurrections are a common theme in mythologies, often used to explain the cycle of life, death, and the fertility of the land. In Sumerian mythology, it is said that the goddess Inanna descends to the underworld each year, only to be killed by her sister, the queen of the underworld. However, she is later resurrected, symbolizing the return of fertility to the land. Similarly, in Egyptian mythology, Osiris is killed each year by Seth, his body dismembered and scattered across the country. His sister, Isis, recovers the pieces and uses magic to reassemble them, enabling Osiris to be resurrected. This event marks the rising of the Nile's water level and the arrival of its precious silt, an essential fertilizer that allows life to begin anew. Interestingly, Egypt had a significant influence on the culture of Canaan, and the Canaanites, in turn, developed an alphabet based purely on the Egyptian pictograms used in the Sinai Peninsula. Our letter A, for instance, derives from the simplification of an Egyptian pictogram representing a bull's head. This letter spread through the Phoenician traders to many lands, such as Greece, and was later redesigned by the Romans into our modern A. As usual, bulls keep playing a significant role in all of this. Returning to our story, Baal also had a recurrent enemy. In the Baal cycle, Baal is depicted battling Yam, the god of the sea, likely a giant sea serpent like the Leviathan. Baal also fights Tannan, the formidable twisted serpent, Lotan, the fugitive serpent, and the mighty serpent with 7 heads. These narratives bear a striking resemblance to the Sumerian myth of slain heroes, in which Ninurta fights magical monsters, including a 7-headed ram, a 7-headed serpent, a mermaid, and various other. What is happening? The year is 1200 BCE, and a series of devastating earthquakes have just struck our civilizations, causing buildings to collapse and thousands of people to die. The weather fluctuates between extremes, either too hot or too cold, and the scarcity of rainfall leads to widespread droughts and famines. People are abandoning the cities due to food shortages, either reverting back to nomadic lifestyles or forming militia groups to launch assaults on villages to plunder their resources. Social and political unrest is spreading throughout the world, and anarchy is increasing drastically in most civilizations. In places where anarchy has yet to take root, intense wars rage between the Egyptians and the Hittites, and an unknown civilization called the Sea People, likely coming from the Aegean region, is also launching a maritime assault on Egypt, causing chaos and havoc. Egypt survives the naval invasion, but there are other enemies in the Sinai ready to strike. Egypt remained an exceptionally powerful country, even during the Bronze Age collapse, and its dominion extended to include most of Canaan and up to Anatolia, a region Egypt frequently used as a corridor to clash against the powerful Hittites. Nevertheless, one enemy proved more challenging than the others, and this enemy was not a nation, but a group of nomadic shepherds, the Shasu. These shepherds roamed the southern regions of Canaan, and they were known for their hit-and-run tactics, for plundering and stealing from Egyptian settlements whenever they had the chance. Ancient inscriptions on Egyptian temples suggest that these nomadic tribes might have originated from Mount Seir, potentially close to what is now Petra in Jordan, previously known as the land of Edom. Little could the Egyptians have imagined, though, that the primary deity of the Shasu, Yahweh, was none other than the god of what was there to become the biblical Old Testament. And these inscriptions prompt scholars to propose that these shepherds could be the earliest Israelites. These tribes were particularly powerful, and they frequently cut off Egyptian access to the land of Canaan. for extended periods of time. Ramses II and his son Merneptah routinely organized punitive missions to re-establish order, successfully defeat the Shasu, and recorded the victory in the Merneptah Stele, where the name Israel is mentioned for the first time in a non-biblical source. However, it's important to note that these theories, while supported by many scholars, are not universally accepted, and continue to be subjects of ongoing academic debate. Though, when it comes to the biblical account of Yahweh's origins, in Judges chapter 5 verses 4 and 5, we read, "When you, Lord, went out from Seir, when you marched from the land of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water, the mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel." The Shasu, or early Israelites, similarly to other Semitic-speaking peoples, who used the title Belu to mean Lord, did not pronounce the name of their god, Yahweh. Instead, they preferred to use the title Adonai, which means my Lord. That's why in biblical translations, we see Lord, and only a few Bibles refer to him as Adonai Yahweh or Jehovah. As you may remember, Yahweh is one of the 70 sons of Elyon, and the brother of Baal, and like them, Yahweh is a god of the thunderstorm. As illustrated in Judges 5, Yahweh is represented by dense clouds that pour water, and many other verses can confirm his thunderstorm god qualities, such as Nahum chapter 1 verse 3. "The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power. The Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. His way is in the whirlwind and the storm, and clouds are the dust of his feet." Psalm chapter 18 verse 13. "The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded." Jeremiah chapter 10 verse 13. "When he thunders, the water in the heavens roar. He makes clouds rise from the ends of the earth. He sends lightning with the rain, and brings out the wind from his storehouses." Moreover, Yahweh, similarly to the gods of other civilizations, takes part in wars and sides with those that worship him. Yahweh is also portrayed as a warrior who fights alongside the Israelites in many wars, as in Exodus chapter 15 verse 3. "The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name." Isaiah chapter 42 verse 13. "The Lord will march out like a champion. Like a warrior, he will stir up his zeal. With a shout, he will raise the battle cry, and will triumph over his enemies." Joshua chapter 10 verse 14. "There has never been a day like it before or since. A day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely, the Lord was fighting for Israel." Yahweh also clearly states in Genesis chapter 17, verses from 10 to 14, that every male at least 8 days old must be circumcised as a symbol of his alliance with him, revealing the true purpose of the practice. Moreover, Yahweh in Exodus chapter 13 verse 2 asks the families to consecrate the firstborn males to him, both humans and animals. Yahweh also led the Israelites to victory in many wars, as depicted in the Battle of Jericho in Joshua chapter 6, Gideon's battle against the Midianites in Judges chapter 7, David and Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Yahweh also frequently received spoils of war, such as in Joshua chapter 6 verse 19. After the Battle of Jericho, Yahweh receives gold, silver, and other bronze articles in his treasury. In Numbers chapter 31, verses from 35 to 40, Yahweh receives 675 sheep, 72 cows, 61 donkeys, and 32 virgin women. And in Numbers chapter 31, verses from 50 to 54, Yahweh receives armlets, bracelets, rings, earrings, and necklaces for a total weight of 16,750 shekels, which is 490 pounds or 190 kilograms. When it comes to the concept of creation in Genesis 1, we read that Yahweh created the heavens and the earth, mirroring the way Enlil was said to have divided the heavens from the earth in the oldest creation myth. Moreover, Yahweh was also described as having divided the waters from the waters in Genesis 1:6, just as Marduk had done before him. This similarly likely arises because the Israelites, like most ancient civilizations, envisioned the universe as a flat, disc-shaped earth floating on water, with heaven above and the underworld below. Moreover, Genesis 1:27 states that Yahweh created both men and women in his image and likeness. This verse is probably one of the most renowned and cherished in the Bible. However, we must pay attention to a critical detail. Although Genesis 1:27 states that God created men and women in his image and likeness, many other deities throughout history have purportedly done the same. In many mythologies, gods like Enki and Ninhursag in Sumerian mythology are said to have created humans in their own image and likeness by combining earthly materials, representative of our mortality, with the flesh of a god, indicative of our divine likeness. This tendency towards human-like characteristics in deities, also known as anthropomorphism, is very common. Why do deities resemble humans? Philosophical observations, such as noticing that a flower begets other flowers and a cow gives birth to other cows, led humans to speculate that, by regression, there must have been an original human-like deity who created all of us in his image and likeness. This reasoning follows the same pattern of logic that from a calf we can deduce the existence of an original cow that gave birth to it. Additionally, the story of Eve transgressing God's commands by eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, thereby afflicting humanity with sin and mortality, has parallels in other mythologies too. In these stories, the main characters, driven by human curiosity, temptations and desires, or the pursuit towards immortality and knowledge, eat or drink forbidden foods, actions of disobedience that inevitably lead to devastating consequences. Some similar stories may include Pandora, the first woman in Greek mythology, was given a jar by the gods and told not to open it. Driven by curiosity, she opened it anyway, thereby releasing evil and chaos into the world. Only hope remained in the jar, which was all that humanity was left with. In Norse mythology, Izun is said to be the goddess of youth, and she possesses a tree whose apples keep the gods immortal. But one day, Loki kidnaps Izun and her tree, bringing mortality to the world. In the Buddhist tradition, some of the earliest living creatures were drawn to the fragrance of the fruit of the jambu tree. Consuming these fruits, due to their attraction to external objects, driven by their physical desires, resulted in the decay of their ethereal bodies into imperfection. This transformation subsequently led to the differentiation in genders and gave origin to the cycle of birth, aging, and death. Another important theme in religions is the presence of giant snakes. In Job chapter 41, verses from 1 to 34, Yahweh describes the Leviathan, an enormous sea serpent that represents evil, to which Yahweh claims to be superior and more powerful than it. Typically, in most mythologies, the strongest gods, which are the thunderstorm gods, fight and kill giant sea serpents to affirm their supremacy. Here are some examples. The thunderstorm god Thor fights Jormungand in Norse mythology. The thunderstorm god Marduk fights Tiamat in the Babylonian mythology. The thunderstorm god Baal fights Lotan in the Ugaritic mythology. The thunderstorm god Indra fights Vritra in Hinduism. Hercules, son of Zeus, fights Hydra in Greek mythology. The origins of Yahweh and his ascension to the position as the highest god of Israel, surpassing his father Elyon, the highest Canaanite deity, and absorbing him along with his other 69 sons to become the only god, is a topic heavily debated among scholars. There is no definitive answer regarding his origins. Some trace his origins to inland Jordan, others to Sinai or northern Arabia. Furthermore, the Canaanite hypothesis suggests that he may have arrived in Israel through caravan trading routes from Egypt to Canaan. Upon Yahweh's introduction to Israel, he was simply one of the 70 sons of Elyon. However, two events forever shifted Israeli history. The northern kingdom of Israel was crushed in 722 BCE during the siege of Samaria by the Assyrian king Sargon II. Subsequently, King Sargon ordered the deportation and displacement of its population throughout the Assyrian Empire in an event known as the Assyrian Captivity, while concurrently deciding to relocate some Assyrians to Israel to create cultural divisions. Despite these movements, a part of Israel remained intact, the kingdom of Judah. As the Assyrians weakened, the Babylonians seized the opportunity to take control of the Assyrian Empire, and they decided to extend their dominion by also occupying the southern region of Israel, the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Judah was conquered in 596 BCE under the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, who later installed a puppet king in it, Zedekiah. However, when Zedekiah rebelled against the Babylonians responded by crushing the kingdom of Judah once more in 586 BCE. This led to the deportation of a large portion of the Israelite population to Babylon, marking the beginning of the infamous Babylonian captivity. Despite this adversity, the Israelites, astonishingly, managed to preserve their culture and maintain unity. Some scholars posit that a significant portion of the Hebrew Bible may have been written precisely during this period. Another significant event in Israelite history occurred when Cyrus the Great, ruler of the Persian Empire, declared war on the Babylonian Empire and captured it. Cyrus the Great chose to release the Israelites from Babylonian captivity and allow them to return to Israel, which was now a province of the Persian Empire called Yehud. And here's a Persian coin issued back in the day in Yehud, probably depicting Yahweh sitting on a winged throne. When the Israelites returned to their homeland, their culture and unity, bolstered by many decades of collective resistance, were stronger than ever. It was during this time that the Israelites chose Yahweh over El Elyon as their highest god. This preference could be attributable to Yahweh's warrior qualities and protective nature, which reflected the challenges faced in the preceding centuries. In addition, it's possible that the Israelites were influenced by Zoroastrianism, the state religion of the Persian Empire. Zoroastrianism is considered one of the most ancient monotheistic religions, as it preaches about the creator, Ahura Mazda, embodiment of light and goodness, despite often being regarded as dualistic for the presence of his enemy, the embodiment of darkness and evil, Angra Mainyu. Moreover, upon their return, the Israelites regarded Yahweh's name as so sacred that its pronunciation was considered taboo, and they opted to use the more common title, Adonai, meaning my Lord. The name Yahweh was considered so holy that it could only be pronounced once a year by the highest priest on the Day of Atonement. Moreover, Yahweh now absorbed into himself his father, El Elyon, and all the other 69 brothers, thus assuming the title Elyon as the highest god. In this absorption, according to the oldest tradition, Yahweh also acquired his father's wife, Atharat, under the name of Asherah. However, as this contradicted Yahweh's self-sufficiency as a god, Asherah was later removed. Some other mysterious names Yahweh got in this absorption include El Shaddai, traditionally translated as God Almighty, had an original meaning that remains somewhat unclear. If Shaddai were derived from Shadu, the Akkadian word for mountain, scholars suggest it could mean Great Mountain. Alternatively, it might be the toponym of a mountainous location known as Shaddai. Interestingly, one of the epithets of Amaru, the god of the Amorites and later Babylonians, also known as Marduk, was precisely Shaddai, meaning mountain dweller. This could possibly be a reference to Sinai, where Yahweh handed the clay tablets to Moses. Other hypotheses propose that Shaddai might have been derived from the word Shaddai, meaning uncultivated land, thus rendering the meaning into God of the wilderness. It could have also originated from the word Shaddad, which means to plunder, to desolate, or to overpower, akin to the Arabic word Shadid, translating the meaning of Shaddai into God the Destroyer. Some scholars propose that the relative particle, Shah, could indicate sufficiency, implying the meaning of the self-sufficient God, while others suggest it might stem from the word Shad, meaning breast, possibly referring to Yahweh's past as a thunderstorm and rain-bringing god. Another intriguing name for Yahweh is El Olam, which is commonly translated as everlasting God. However, there is ongoing debate suggesting that Olam does not refer to infinity. This argument posits that the Israelites did not have a concept to express eternality. Instead, they intended to describe a god whose time of existence and death are unknown. Perhaps the most complex and confusing term to refer to God is Elohim, a plural form of the word Eloah, which poetically translates to God. Both Eloah and Elohim are commonly translated as God in the Bible, but the meaning of Elohim is far from straightforward. Indeed, Elohim is often used to denote a variety of immortal entities, such as other Canaanite deities, foreign gods, and angels, including the seraphim and cherubim. It can also refer to mortal figures, such as kings and judges. Modern translations frequently interpret Elohim as a plural of respect for God. However, others argue that it should be preserved as Elohim in its plural form, and the specific entities it refers to should be determined through the context of the plural verb usage. The most controversial verse in the Bible where Elohim is used is Psalm chapter 82 verse 1, where we read that, "God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods." Elohim equals gods. Or, God presides over heaven's court. He pronounces judgment on the heavenly beings. Elohim equals heavenly beings. Or, God is standing in the assembly of God. In the midst of the gods, he renders judgment. God in the assembly of God, Elohim equals gods. Or even, God stands in the assembly of El. In the midst of the gods, he renders judgment. Assembly of El? This naturally leads to several questions. What kind of assembly does Yahweh participate in? Why do some translations suggest that he is part of his own assembly? Could this be a reference to the concept of the Trinity? And who exactly are these other gods, or heavenly beings, mentioned at the end of the sentence? The understanding of these names is particularly crucial in distinguishing between the remnants of polytheism and the gradual transition to monotheism, the concept of the only God, Yahweh. The shift to monotheism was indeed a slow and, at times, violent process. The acceptance of Yahweh as the sole deity was not universally acknowledged among the Israelites, and there was significant conflict among those who favored Yahweh, Elyon, or Baal. Baal, in particular, held significant prominence in the regions ranging from Israel to Phoenicia, Syria, and up to the modern-day border of Syria and Turkey. Interestingly, Yahweh, Elyon, and Baal were often portrayed similarly, as thunderstorm gods associated with mountains and symbolized by a bull. Yahweh was associated with Mount Seir, Elyon with Mount Lel, and Baal with Mount Shapanu. Their representations were so alike, even in terms of their statues, that it provides possible insight into how Yahweh, our God, may have been imagined during the polytheistic period, when representations and images were still allowed. And this polytheistic to monotheistic transition can be seen especially in these verses, Deuteronomy 32, 8-9, 12. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, where the Most High is Elyon, the highest Canaanite deity with 70 sons. When he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples, according to the number of sons of Israel, who are the sons of Elyon. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob his allotted inheritance. Jacob is the viceroy of Yahweh. Other kings are viceroys of the other sons of Elyon in the division of Israel. And in the verse 12 we read, "The Lord alone led him. No foreign god was with him," meaning that the other brothers of Yahweh and their viceroys did not help Jacob in the administration. The competitiveness was so fierce between Yahweh and Baal that we have two very funny stories from the Bible to present to you. Our first story comes from 1 Kings chapter 18, where Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to demonstrate which God is the only true God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, or Baal. The challenge is set on Mount Carmel, and both teams have to sacrifice a bull and let it on the altar without opening fire, but respectively call for their God to open it. And if they succeed, they prove their God to be the true God. The team of Baal tries to summon Baal from morning to midday and keeps failing even in the evening. But the team of Yahweh is successful, and Elijah therefore orders to capture the prophets of Baal and to kill them. As soon as that happens, a thunderstorm arrives in the sky, bringing rain after a long time, and this makes everyone happy. In fact, before this event, Yahweh, the jealous God, was punishing the Israelites with droughts for believing in false gods such as Baal. The second amusing story involves the Israelites, who frequently had conflicts and skirmishes with the Philistines. The Philistines are a people very often linked to the Sea Peoples, displaced by the pharaohs to regions south of Israel. The Philistines made concerted efforts to assimilate into Canaanite culture, even adopting a Canaanite deity, Dagon, as their Baal or primary god. However, the Israelites held such disdain for the Philistines that they derogatorily referred to their god as Beelzebub, a term translating to Lord of the Flies. This was meant to suggest that their god was a piece of cow dung, a thinly veiled insult implying that the Philistines were like worms, slithering in this dung. Over time, due to animosity towards Baal, followers in certain Christian sects started to equate Beelzebub with the devil or Satan. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Yehoshua ben Yosef, also known as Yeshua, and later known as Jesus, was born in Bethlehem, Judea, one of the many provinces of the Roman Empire. Much of his childhood remains a mystery. He grew up in Nazareth, a small village in Galilee, and it is said that he may have engaged in debates with scholars at the age of 12 in the Temple of Jerusalem. Later in life, as per the accounts that would eventually comprise the New Testament, his work included teaching, healing, and performing miracles. He restored sight to the blind, tended to the poor, and even resurrected a dead girl. As per Luke 8:52-55. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. He drew many followers and selected 12 apostles to assist him in disseminating his teachings. He viewed himself as the son of Adonai, or son of the Lord, and referred to Adonai as Abba in Aramaic, which translates to father. Many Jews regarded these declarations as the utmost blasphemy and denounced him. Nevertheless, his following continued to expand swiftly, and to the gathering crowds he proclaimed, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Let the one thing among you who is without sin to be the first to cast a stone. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And know that I am with you always, yes, to the end of time." Yet his ministry was met with disdain. His self-proclamation as the Messiah, a figure some believed to have been prophesied in the Old Testament, was not well received. The Jewish community called for his death as soon as possible. The Roman authorities, noticing Jesus' growing number of followers, began to fear the possibility of an imminent independence movement in Judea. Thus, under the governorship of Pontius Pilate, Yeshua was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, betrayed by one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot. He was subsequently tried, beaten, whipped, and then forced to carry his own cross up a mountain. His hands and feet were nailed to the cross, and a note of mockery was written on the titulus of the cross to state the reason for his condemnation. Inri Jesus Nazarenos Rex Udeorum, translating to Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. This phrase was written in a tone of sarcasm, mocking Jesus' ambition and aspiration to establish the kingdom of God. Additionally, a crown of thorns was placed on his head to signify his coronation. Jesus was killed, and according to biblical accounts, he resurrected after 3 days. This theme of resurrection was prevalent in previous civilizations, as you're already aware, but here it served a different purpose: the salvation of humanity from sins. The Romans could not have imagined in the slightest that what they had just done would hit them like a storm in the centuries to come. A new religion, Christianity, was born from Judaism, distinguishing itself as a separate entity. This movement claimed to have recognized the true Messiah, something the Jews had overlooked. The Old Testament, already translated into Koine Greek, was combined with the New Testament, also penned in this language. Given that Koine Greek served as the common language from Greece to the farthest corners of the Middle East, a legacy of Alexander the Great's empire, the teachings of Jesus rapidly became mainstream. These teachings were interpreted in different ways, based on the philosophical and cultural context of the readers. The Greeks, for example, often highlighted the divine nature of Christ and perceived salvation as deification or theosis, becoming one with the divine nature. The West, with its Roman legal traditions, underscored the human nature of Christ and saw salvation more in terms of legal atonement for sin. Traces of previous polytheistic traditions persisted, even as Christianity was embraced. Meanwhile, the Jews continued to refer to Christians as Notzrim, as if this movement were a Jewish faction that originated in Nazareth, meaning Nazarenes. Hence, in many Semitic and Muslim-majority language countries, Christians are referred to as Nazri, including Arabic, Turkish, Malay, Indonesian, Persian, Kurdish, and Urdu. For a variety of reasons, the Roman Empire was in turmoil at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, barely managing to sustain itself. The Mos Maiorum, the Roman traditions and gods, gradually declined. In their stead, Christianity rose as the new foundation for the next 2,000 years, and through wars and colonization, it evolved as an extension of Judaism to become the most widespread Abrahamic religion. Muhammad is in a state of meditation and prayer on Mount Hira, overlooking the city of Mecca, the city of his birth, now under his command. He reflects, from Adam to Noah, to Abraham to Moses, to Jesus, Allah has chosen me, Muhammad, as his final prophet, and Allah has selected me to deliver his ultimate message to humankind. Mecca before me was dominated by polytheistic tribes fighting each other, ruled by their many false gods. But Allah, the one and only true God, united all the tribes of Arabia under his might. The message of Allah must reach all of humanity, so that his justice is widely understood. Because there will come a day when everyone will be held accountable for their actions in this life before him. For the only correct path is that of Islam, which calls for submission and servitude to Allah. Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was born in Mecca at a time when polytheism prevailed. His father passed away before he had the chance to meet him, and his mother died prematurely when he was just 6 years old. Following these tragic events, his grandfather assumed the responsibility of raising him. However, his grandfather also died 2 years later, leaving Muhammad in the care of his uncle, Abu Talib, who treated him with great kindness. As he grew into a young man, Muhammad earned a reputation as a respected tradesman, known for his integrity and honesty. He married Khadija, a widow for whom he had been working. After 2 decades of meditative practice and experiencing revelations atop Mount Hira, he felt compelled to spread the word of Allah. Initially, Muhammad preached these revelations only to his family and close friends. As his teachings spread, however, a larger following began to assemble. The only source of sorrow for Muhammad was the refusal of his uncle, Abu Talib, to convert to Islam. His promotion of monotheism clashed with the polytheistic beliefs in Mecca, leading him to seek refuge in Medina. Years later, after accumulating a massive following in Medina, Muhammad laid siege to Mecca and won. He removed the statues of the polytheistic gods from the Kaaba, and thus established himself as the ruler. In Islam, Allah is seen as a continuation of Yahweh under a different name, originating from Yahweh's poetic form, Eloah, Allah in Arabic. The term La is directly related to the Northwest Semitic cognate, El, and the Akkadian term, Ilam. Furthermore, Islam upholds many of the original commandments that Yahweh placed upon his followers, sharing significant similarities. These include rituals like circumcision, adherence to strict dietary laws, such as halal and kosher, and specific prayer practices. For Muslims, this involves praying 5 times a day facing Mecca, while for Jews, it involves praying 3 times a day towards Jerusalem. Fasting traditions are also observed during Ramadan for Muslims and Yom Kippur for Jews. Additionally, there's a mandatory practice of providing charity to the poor, known as zakat in Islam and sadaqah in Judaism. Furthermore, Islam's strong emphasis on submission appears to echo the enduring religious practices of the Middle East, which often portrays gods as creating humans for their service. One ancient translation in Islam, with roots in polytheism, is the veneration of the Kaaba Baytullah and the Black Stone. The Kaaba Baytullah and its Black Stone are classified as Baitalus in Greece, coming from the Hebrew word Bethel, meaning house of God, a type of sacred stone, more often meteorites, that ancient civilizations have worshipped for thousands of years. Examples include the Omphalos stone in Delphi, revered by the ancient Greeks, said to facilitate communication with the gods, Jacob's pillar at Bethel mentioned in the book of Genesis, and various other sacred stones worshipped by the Phoenicians and Romans. After Muhammad's death, the caliphs greatly extended the reach of Islam across the Middle East and North Africa. Concurrently, traders introduced Islam into Central Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. As a result of these far-reaching efforts, today, Islam stands as the second most widespread Abrahamic religion globally, and as the second continuation of Judaism after Christianity. Now that our main presentation is over, let's take a step back and analyze the broader picture. With the invention of agriculture, our ancestors established themselves around rivers, creating civilizations and sustaining themselves by working the land. The natural events that governed their agricultural practices became their gods. First important symbol to remember: thunderstorms. Most major gods in the mythologies and religions of these ancient civilizations, such as Zeus, Thor, Tengri, Indra, Raijin, Baal, Enlil, Marduk, including the god of Abraham, Yahweh, also known as God in Christianity, and Allah in Islam, are associated with thunderstorms because thunderstorms, with their enormous black clouds, deafening thunders, and lightning, which can hit houses and people at random, are the most powerful natural events visible in the sky. On the positive side, thunderstorms bring rain, essential for agriculture. But on the negative side, if rainfall is too strong, the rivers near which these civilizations established would overflow, leading to destruction, and in the most extreme cases, to the end of the known world of these civilizations. This is where the concept of Great Flood originates, from which one could save himself only if he had a boat or lived near mountains. Thunderstorm gods, moreover, were male, because it mirrored the positive social expectation of men in society. Men were providers of food for their families, and so were thunderstorm gods providers of rainfall. Men were also providers of protection for their families, and so were thunderstorm gods, very often also warrior gods. But at the same time, on the negative side, fathers could also be a threat to their families, because men had the right of life and death over the family members, even for trivial reasons, like in the story of Enlil, who washes humanity out of existence because humans did not let him sleep. Obedience and respect of fathers, even when they did not deserve it, has been for thousands of years the only way to not risk being murdered in your own household. Second, mountains. Mountains have always been the most sacred places in every religion. Zeus and his family resided on Mount Olympus. Mount Kailash is the house of Vishnu. Mount Meru represents the center of the metaphysical universe in Eastern religions. Mount Fuji is the most sacred place in Shinto. Moses receives the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai, and Muhammad receives the revelations on Mount Hira. Additionally, our God Yahweh, God Allah, comes from Mount Seir. His father, Elyon, lives on Mount Lel, and his brother Baal on Mount Shapanu. This is because the sky has always been viewed as a gateway to heaven for being unreachable, and climbing a mountain was the best way to get closer to the sky heaven. Furthermore, in certain cultures, like the Indo-Europeans, the sky or daylight itself is considered to be God, and this is where God's omniscience comes from. Being the sky can see everything you do. Third, bulls and snakes. The bull is, by far, the most important animal to have ever existed in human history. It is famously the most sacred animal in Hinduism, and it is also the sacred animal of thunderstorm gods such as Zeus, Enlil, Marduk, Elyon, Baal and Yahweh, for making the earth to quake when they run. Like thunderstorm gods make mountains quake with their thunders. This is because oxen have worked hand in hand with humans for thousands of years, pulling our plows, and cows have provided milk and secondary products. A fat cow or bull has always been considered a characteristic of very wealthy farmers, and slaughtering a bull to eat or sacrifice was considered the utmost luxury one farmer could afford. The respect for these animals was so high that the first constellation we drew in the night sky was Taurus, and Bootes represents Enlil driving the oxen cart. The letter A from our alphabet is a slow development from the Egyptian pictogram of a bull's head, and Aleph in Rabbinic Judaism symbolizes the oneness with God, proving how important our relationship with oxen has been for thousands of years. On the opposite side, we have snakes, the most despised animals by the gods. Almost all thunderstorm gods have encountered and fought with big sea serpents, or snakes at least once. Whether it is the snake in Genesis, Leviathan, Lotan, Tiamat, Jormungandr, Apophis, or Vritra, snakes have been despised since the ancientest times and linked to chaos, evilness, and cowardice. This perception stems from the fact that snakes move silently and unpredictably, capable of following you on land, water, and trees. Additionally, the biggest ones possess the ability to either strangle you with their deadly force, while the smaller ones deliver a fatal bite injecting venom, leading to death within minutes after being bitten. Fourth, animism to monotheism. Before civilizations existed, humans lived among the creatures of nature, felt equal to them, and held deep respect for each plant and animal, believing that each possessed a spirit worth praying to. However, once civilizations were built, humans ascended to the top of the food chain. They started to feel special and disregarded the value of plants and animals, forgetting their origins, and started considering these animals as inferior, whose suffering was worth exploiting. Nature became ours. Animals were no longer seen as threats, and as we rose, the world was ours. But who was to own it? Who was meant to be at the top of the top? Humans later observed that from one plant, a similar plant is born, that from one animal, another similar animal is born, and from a human, another human is born. Also, reverse deductions could be made. If a calf is born from an original cow, humans must come from an original creator, which is similar to us in image and likeness. Humans also took the first steps towards the concepts of justice, observing that light is good because light is necessary for plants to grow and for enemies to be spotted, while the darkness of night is bad, for it does not allow plants to grow and enemies to be spotted. The cycle of life and death of each living thing was therefore imagined as a circle, where thousands of gods were creating organisms and then destroying them in a perpetual cycle. And although there was a main god in each of these polytheistic religions, each city of the earliest civilizations preferred to worship the one deity they found the most useful for their needs, leading to division even among the city-states of the same country, culminating in internal wars. It is difficult to build an empire when each one believes and follows his own paths in life. Therefore, a new system was required. Gods thus united into one all-powerful, all-knowing singularity, from which everything originates, and into which all philosophy, human thinking, curiosity, doubts, and insecurities are absorbed. The infinite power of the singularity fell into the hands of divinely appointed kings who, to justify their dominion to their subjects, claim to be appointed by God and speak and act in His will, the highest symbol of justice and good. Little did the subjects under such kings realize, though, that it was their collective belief in such a deity that made these kings special, without which these kings would have been nobody, if not just other men. Laws were therefore written and implicit moral codes established, to which whoever did not observe was kicked out of society, silenced, or jailed. The animist remnants of spiritualism, such as beliefs in frightening demons and ghosts, along with the concept of sins punishable by eternal damnation, served effectively to maintain silence and obedience among the citizens. And when the people, mostly consisting of very poor farmers, felt mistreated and abused by the kings and their authority, and demanded a bit of dignity, it was told to them, "Don't worry, in the end you will receive your recompense for your sufferings. The more you suffer, the more is your reward in the afterlife." That's how powerful people kept the masses busy, while they were plundering the world for their own benefits and purposes. The ancient Romans knew this very well, and the etymology of religion itself is quite self-explanatory. Religion, from the Latin word religare, which is also close to lex, legis means, to bind together. Whatever binds us spiritually unites us as a community, leading to a primordial form of spiritual nationalism, where theology is the politics, and theologians are the politicians. I hope you found this video enlightening, enjoyable, and overall useful. It is the product of years of research, 1 full month of writing on my part, and an additional month of diligent editing by my editor. If you have come so far, and dedicated so much time of yours watching our video, we are truly pleased to say, congratulations on reaching the finish line. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.